All right, starting my speech, in three, two, one. Judge, we think that the debate functions in religious societies that also happen to have environmental movements. Countries where there is religious influence in places like South Asia with India, countries like Southeast Asia with Malaysia, or even the Middle East where they have green protesters, but also a certain demographic of religious individuals. The reason why this is important and it's not anywhere else is simply because these are areas where the belief of karma is the most influential and important. So this is where we think the context of the debate is most impacted by. What do we think preaching looks like before I move on to the two arguments? We think it looks like two things. The first is the belief of karma that states that the current, present, and future experiences is dictated by the actions you commit now. So what this ultimately means is that when you commit a certain crime, there is a certain harm that happens towards you. And just scientifically, we can prove this to be true, right? The more you pollute in the current status quo, the effects of climate change is likely going to happen far within the future, or there are certain effects where even if you pollute now, the current effects can also happen within the present. So if you look at Indonesia, for example, they suffered a massive hazing crisis, which immediately affect the vast majority of individuals living in those areas. Or places like China, where because of the increasing of carbon emission is what ultimately led to the massive hazing problem that happened in Shanghai and Taipei. So what this ultimately means is that even though scientifically this is true, we can use this as backing to further our rhetoric in getting more religious people to join us. The second way that we are likely going to preach this rhetoric in regards to environmental campaigns and the way we integrate it is simply via going to churches or via like going to, for example, religious rallies in order to get them to support us. All right, so two arguments then. The first argument is on how this is an effective means for buy-in for religious people, like a very stock generic argument. The second is on why corporations are bad. Argument one, how this is an effective means for buy-in for religious people. The first question I want to answer is what's the problem with status quo? We think there are two things. The first is that the current green movement is not well liked. Empirically, this is true. Politicians like Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, Kamala Harris, who champion for these green and more liberal policies, get ultimately lambasted by the right for being too liberal, associated with Antifa. The fact that you have movements like XR ultimately leads to these kinds of rhetoric where if you eat even if you eat plant-based meat or opt for greener policies, it's still seen as a sin or isn't in line with what the churches preach and is therefore a sin. But even if this isn't true, you ultimately create an echo chamber where there is a current gap between right-wing politicians and left-wing politicians, where you make the green movement seen as a liberal policy rather than a policy that affects all individuals, which ultimately increases the rhetoric in explaining why is it that climate change isn't true.
Nation.
If you look at Jordan Peterson, no thank you, I said PYs in the chat. If you look at Jordan Peterson, for example, he is a huge climate change denier. So even if there's scientific evidence to suggest that climate change isn't real, less people are willing to opt into it or believe in science as they rather believe in religion. The second thing today is that people just sometimes don't feel the effects of climate change. Like we think that some individuals who are incredibly privileged get the belief or luxury of not experiencing the harms of hazing or massive pollutions, which happen in places which exist in most disprivileged countries, so like India, Malaysia, etc., etc. And they believe that the effects that they've caused will not happen in their lifetime, which is why a lot of massive corporations can get away with not funding any of these policies because they believe that they're old and that these probably won't affect them. But before I move on, I'll take a point.
Wait, so in that case, are you going to like shift the entire green movement to the right?
No, so on both sides of the house, obviously we're going to have some form of scientific evidence, right? The debate is about whether or not we should use this as a method to preach onto other individuals and bridge the gap between the left and the right. We don't really need to map out how or set up this argument because it's quite intuitive. So I'll just jump into the impacts. There are four impacts to this. The first is in regards to funding. Churches and like schools and all that stuff and temples will fund us more. The reason why this is important is that we receive lots of funding. They are exempted from taxes. They get constant streams of funding via charity. They look at the freaking Vatican Church, right? Because they're exempted for taxes, they literally earn billions of dollars every single year, but having to donate it back into the like the rest of society. The majority of government welfare literally comes directly from the church itself. But second is in regards to social influence. Think of your friends, think of your family, think of your boss, for example, at work. Many of them go to churches, many of them subscribe to these forms of religion. It has massive amounts of social influence and how it convinces people because they believe that the impact that they've done within the status quo can affect them not just in this life, but in the life well beyond theirs. Third is political influence. Empirically, this is also true. The majority of conservatives, who are religious by the way, are also the same people who pollute. Empirically, this is true when you take a look at USA, for example, where the Republican Party has been held responsible for the massive amount of tax breaks for ExxonMobil, but also are the main denominator in regards to religious Christian rhetoric. Like, guys, Donald Trump literally tried selling Bibles in order to get more funds for his campaign. Fourth, you also get more buy-in from people on the ground because they see a direct causal link that this will affect them in the future. If science isn't going to convince these people, then religion definitely will. Because regardless of whatever religion you believe in, the common denominator is that they do see the common denominator is that they believe in a higher power, they believe in the concepts of karma, like in religion or Buddhism, they feel guilt and they will not pollute, and because humans are inherently selfish. Why is this important? Number one, you call religious narratives is good because now you get access to funding. A majority of green environmental policies are seen as woke and are not supported by big corporations. By doing so, you change this. Second, even if you don't co-opt, you depower a lot of the right-wing voter base, and for the most part, consists of religious people because of the empirical reasons are given. You splinter them, you reduce support for these policies that pollute the environment, which is already a net good. Third, many religious people are old and conservative. The reason why they don't support higher taxes for oil and green stuff is that they don't see an urgency that comes with it, when it comes to the environment. Think about it, right? If I'm already 80, there's no point in supporting a policy that happens 50 years down the line. Doing so changes this. So now they support, and this is something that is important because many old people are strong. Look at all the CEOs in or big oil or politicians. They had years to garner massive political and social influence, which is why by doing so, you change this narrative. Why is this exclusive? Look, religious people will believe in karma on either side. The difference then is on whether or not we should use this rhetoric in promoting our environmental campaign. Maybe OO says they already care. Problem is that they don't see it as scientifically true. They only see it as a hoax. We bridge the gap by boycotting getting exposure. Argument 2, corporations are bad. When I ordered my the boys plushie from Amazon, I didn't pick the green option. By allowing this choice for me to pick the green option instead of mandating it, it's actually far, far worse for the environment. For all those reasons, opening government.
Thanks, PM, calling. Hello.
All right. Hi, am I audible and visible?
Loud and clear.
All right. So I'll take POIs verbally, just shout it, don't heckle, all's good. The most disingenuous thing in OG is they go, the right-wing people, politicians, they shit on the green movement, and therefore we're going to turn this into a thing that's going to convince religion. This is not how it works. The first thing is that it's extremely disingenuous to assume that most religions within the world is going to buy this concept of karma, and the only reason as to why individuals are unconvinced by the green movement is because religion. So if religion exists, everybody is going to get convinced. Just to be clear, the reason why people are often dissociated from things like the green movement is because the way in which the green movement has historically claimed things like the benefits you get from the environment, or the way in which they approach the general public is often something that is selected. People feel distant from it. I'm going to do this in my setup. The first thing I'll do is to take out all the argumentation. I just want to be clear as what using karma is. Wait, actually, before that, I need to be clear in this debate. You can't reset the debate. You can't say, this is likely to happen in things like India, it's likely to happen in places like China where there is more Buddhism. You can't do that. The debate does not give you power to do that. Nothing beyond that. The truth is, it's not going to happen because this is often a left-wing ideology. They're not going to be stupid enough as a green movement to really shift towards the right within those societies. You can't just assume that it's going to happen. In this motion, you have to fair to assume that to prove what a transition is like this, the transition burden you need to fulfill. So what does this actually look like? Changing to karma means having a drastic shift to a new ideology or new way you present yourself. That is what the green movement needs to do in their side of the house to clean those movements. They have a transition burden. The reason why this is bad is threefold. One, because you obviously aiming in the left in their own roots, right? Which means that often you're going to aim the people that actually started the movement. You're going to turn religious. But second, you're often not going to get accepted by the right either ways, right? But why are you going to get accepted by the right the moment you turn that way? The truth is that just using karma doesn't mean the right is going to buy into your policy to explain it from logical thing. The third thing is that no, you don't get more funding because most states in the world are secular states. In the United States, for instance, in most countries around the world, you're not going to get more funding because nobody is going to buy the ideology just by turning right. That's a very big logical gap. So now, the reason as to why individuals are not going to buy into any of the kind of things that happen in the status quo, regardless of karma, is just one, it's often distant. It's not something that's proximal. It's not something that a population can relate to. But two, karma is often a belief. It's not appealing. It's a scare tactic to explain to you why this is a problem later on. But thirdly, what we kind of prefer is a change. To tell people that there is a collective problem within all of us. It's not versus you versus me. There's a collective problem that what the world is actually shifting to right now. So the problem is that we rather prefer the idea that we as human race is not you, it's for us. That is something that's changing in the world right now. That's a fact. We rather prefer that. So why is karma something that drives people away? One, because the outcome is often more ideal, right? It's something that's superstitious. People don't feel gratification from things that you do. They say you do good and you get good in return. People don't often think like that. We say intuitively, the reason people don't believe in karma, they think, oh, you do bad. Well, that. The point that therefore is that people just be like, okay, I'm not going to believe in karma. And that's what we see in the status quo right now, is that people often distance themselves from it. We rather not have it. They have a stage of denial. That is something that's critical. But the thing is that the reason why you often don't believe in karma that results in some problem, therefore, is because you just drive people away. People are just not going to buy the kind of things you're trying to push because you get more distant. You fight over something that is already very superstitious that people often don't believe in. Think about it. Drive more people away because in most left-leaning societies or centrist societies, no one's going to believe this. They're going to think they're going to turn religious. And the one thing that left people here is the idea that religion is something linked to a state. Right? There's a principle out there. There's a separation of church and state. If you're going to turn karma, you're going to drive away politicians. That principle is violated. Nobody's going to like it. So people are often going to look that, look, I haven't done anything wrong, but the environment is still messed up. It means that karma isn't a thing, right? So that is the point of the status quo. That's something that you need to change. The second argument, therefore, is for why shifting towards collectivism is something that's more important. So this argument is strategic in a sense. It explains to you why the counterfactual or the counterpart that we are pushing for right now is something that's more preferable than turning towards propositions alternative as we try to make karma the main push. One, because in the status quo, there is often saying there's a distance between them. The reason why the green movement is failing right now is because the tactics in which they employ to do things like push out a narrative is very distant. It's not the individuals. For instance, you have things like eco-terrorism. All of these things are often very, very divisive. Because you as an individual, looking at longer run, your life has disrupted the point where people decide to become aggressive and push through things like eco-terrorism. That is the reason why it's often something that is not supported by the public. But the reason why it's getting better is because they're shifting towards a world in which they be like, look, this is a collective ideal. The reason why collectivism only works right now and not 10 years ago is because people right now are actually willing for a change. For instance, corporations are more willing to do small things like actually use like instead of using plastic straws, they use this like paper straws, for instance. These are the kind of small things that people are willing to buy into. You have things in which, like restaurants, for example, big corporations like to use more eco-friendly options. Maybe this isn't something that we feel is extremely important, but it shows a changing mindset that it wouldn't happen 10 years ago. So importantly, the rules are shift. And the way you should recognize this shift is to be like, look, if the push towards collectivism is something we're doing now. So what collectivism looks like is instead of saying that, it's a real problem that you have to deal with as a general public, you say it's our problem. The same way there's a rise in like the hashtag our world movement, for instance, right? The fact that is giving support in like countries like what countries are there? Yeah, Serbia, in Bulgaria, out of order. So in those Baltic states, and similarly in the West, UK, France, we see all of the movements being more and more powerful because there is a push towards the idea of collectivism. The structural reason as to why they're extremely powerful because it takes away the divisive order that was implemented there for the past 10 years. Because every single time in the past 10 years, we see Gita on stage, like, you guys, movements a joke. But right now, the fact that there's more rising movements, you associate with them. You think, okay, many people are actually dying. Maybe 10 years down the road, I'm going to feel an increase in temperature, and that's not something that I want. It's the fact that nowadays you feel rising temperatures, and that's why people are willing to try and buy the kind of movement you're selling. But using them, therefore, why turning this into a narrative of karma as a bad idea is what we dissociate people. People don't think it's something they can buy to. People don't feel that it's something they can relate to, especially when you are a movement that is largely left. I would feel turn towards a belief that is largely controversial. There's largely something there's like kind of the conservative views, for instance. And the reason I never make a funding is because there's a fundamental principle in separation between a state and a church and religion in most secular societies is not going to happen. It's for those reasons opening opposition.
Thank hello calling DPM.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, I'll take POIs in the chat. So, yeah, please don't badger me. Let me get my timer. Panel, global warming is a real threat to everyone. Us, our kids, and our future generation. The World Judge Manual kind of implies that you must debate the debate that OG sets up, which is, we said, that it largely takes place in a conservative country. If not, we won't consider doing this. Well, let's be charitable and, maybe even knife my PM. Let's open the debate to everywhere in the world. We'll prove to you why collectivism is better under our side when we unite people under the umbrella of religion. The first thing I want to talk about is that this debate is not science versus religion, right? We think we can co-opt both sides. That is, if you're religious, you buy in on our side. If you believe in the science, unlike Donald Trump, you can buy into, that side. Insofar as we have more people in the movement, we don't care why you join. You can believe in worshipping a tree or scientific formulas, ice caps melting. We don't care, right? The bottom line we gave you was that we wanted more funding. So Rayner is kind of a clown when he answered the POI. He said, the correct answer on OG is that we think science and religion can coexist. And this takes down his point on funding, right? A very simple formula, money plus money equals more money. I'm going to prove this in a bit. Let's get to, two small pieces of critique of opening opposition. The first thing he says is that karma doesn't work. Again, I just want to point out how we characterize karma to be. It's often a central tenet of many religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism. It's very common in spiritual and New Age movements. There are even sayings, even if you're not religious, like people say what goes around comes around, right? So people generally believe in a form of karma. So I really don't buy this argument about states, backlashing and like destroying the movement. Utter bollocks. Second thing, separation of church and state. Okay, again, we are not claiming that one should overtake the other. We think both can perfectly coexist. I think on op, if you want to run the argument, you must first prove why they can't coexist, why the existence of one will overshadow and destroy the other. We don't think that's true, right? Like, an intuition pump is that we often have many religions in a country. Just because one religion exists does not mean the other religions are minimized. Just because you build a mosque doesn't mean you can't build a temple. Similarly, just because you reply to people's religious sites by speaking of karma doesn't mean you can't show them science after that. It's like a completely separate demographic. So what needs to do with that? I'll talk about two things. Number one, how we improve the movement. Number two, why religion is the metric to do so. Number one, let's talk about how we improve the environment. I'll tell you guys after first argument probably. The first thing is we said is that we make it more personal and people are more likely to buy into environmental friendly movements now. Two reasons. The first is that people want to live a good life in the afterlife. So that's why a lot of people, they do things like tithing or charity if they're religious. They give to underprivileged people because they believe in karma and they want something in the future. Secondly, if your religion also believes in reincarnation, you're very likely to be reincarnated in the same shitty world. That is to say, if you are I'm trying not to swear. If you're someone very selfish like me, and every time you drink boba, you want a straw, people who believe that I'm likely to be reincarnated with a turtle with a straw in my mouth is likely to deter them from using straws. Like, it's a very simple change we can make. So the bottom line of this is that we give them a personal stake in the matter. So, at the point in which you tie it to them personally and say, your future will be like this, you'll be reincarnated as, something really terrible and you're gonna suffer, people are more likely to buy into our policies. Number 2, let's talk about corporations. We don't care if corporations are strong and bulletproof and can pay fines. We think we tackle that from the consumer side. That is, say people are less likely to buy things which are not ethically made, things like Shine, for example. The people are less likely to buy it because they believe, I'm contributing towards child slavery and harming and polluting the environment, and I want a better life. So people are very unlikely to buy Shine. So we think most business models which are based on unethical, polluting environment practices are likely to collapse. Yeah. Why is religion the magic to do so? Before that, let me take CO maybe.
So you mentioned how these religion, but do you realize that religions are usually contradict each other? When you believe in this, you cannot believe in the other. How can you persuade the majority of people that are not Buddhisms? And even as you mentioned, how companies can collapse, but people spend money on companies due to their product, not due to that.
Yes, if you buy a product which is not well made, you have karma. So you will not buy a product which supports child slavery. So that's karma for you. On religion and the conflicting religion, it's true, which is why the motion is very smart. It says karma. So karma is a central tenet of many religions. The first thing I will say is that it's not tied to any religion. Most people can preach karma. Even if you're secular, you believe in what goes around comes around. Just the vibes of it. You don't have to have scripture or anything, but most people quite intuitively believe in this already. Why is this important? We think using a general concept of the afterlife or a divine figure, we don't have to name, we don't have to name the religion and say who we are supporting. We think we can pick and choose. So maybe if you're Buddhist, you believe in it. Maybe if you're a new age religion practicer, you can believe in it as well. It doesn't contradict the concept of karma as one that is generally palatable to most religious people. Okay, let's get back. Why is religion the magic to do so? The first thing we'll say is that people often feel what they don't know. That's why religions are able to guilt trip people into, believing in them because of the afterlife, whatever. Things like Pascal's wager, which says a rational person should live a lifestyle actively striving to believe that there is a God, because the consequence of not believing is so horrible. We think people are more likely to buy into this, right? If you create the idea there is some abstract divine God out there who is retributive, someone who is watching what you do and affecting the environment and will punish you, again, in response to PI, we don't need to name names. A general figure and the general vibe of karma is probably enough to deter people. Why is this important? Most people don't visualize like a particular harm or one thing happening to them. Like if you feel anxious, because of a lot of things. So again, we don't need to specifically name the punishment that's going to come down to you or what God or what law you broke. Just generally, we think we get people in line. The other reason it's important is because God is a higher purpose and authority, right? This means in conservative governments like, everything we name, like even Malaysia or Pakistan or, whatever, God is able to supersede these political figures. So people like Donald Trump, who, pollute the environment, are able to be superseded. His cult of personality gets taken down at the point in which you believe there is a God above you. Again, the conclusion of the OG is very simple. We can co-opt science and religion. I think on OP, we must prove why that cannot be. We think we can specifically use very vague language to describe concepts and the vibes of karma. You guys need to do it on OP. One earth, one chance, make it count.
Thank DPM calling the other.
Alright, may I check? Am I both visible and audible?
Loud and clear.
Is it clearer this way?
Pardon?
Am I audible?
Yeah, clearly audible. Please go ahead.
Alright. Alright, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. I think the entirety of opening government bench forgot this is an actor debate. When we're looking at this from purely the interest of the environmental movement themselves, I think that is at this point where they lost this debate already. I'm going to prove it in my responses later. First thing, I think one point of characterization and clarification first, I think it's the idea that it's uncharitable for them to set a debate in a religious society where people are, of course, just religious. Because we see, right, while karma is tied with some religions, it's not exclusive to religion. I think karma exists as a pathos independently that can appeal to non-religious people as well. I think we have no basis, given this motion, right, to set this debate in such a constraining environment to debate in. I think there's no such rule we have to follow our opening gap. Well set up, we can always challenge his definition. Secondly, let's look at the nature of this debate as an actor debate. I think there's a few things that side opening government has said that's really caused them the case. They firstly have acknowledged that religious demographics are more conservative, likely on the right wing. The second thing is, right, I think it's common knowledge that religious movement, not religious movement, environmental movements, right, are typically almost always left-leaning. And we see in examples in countries like Germany where the Green Party is staunchly opposed to the Christian Democrats, and these are two major parties that exist in the country. We also know that there's a schism between these two ideology groups, right? I think the biggest issue in this debate, right, is that as an actor motion, there is absolutely zero incentive as to why the Green Party, being a left-leaning movement, who want to co-opt an influx of right-wing conservatives into a progressive movement. I think by this metric, we have already lost this debate. But let's engage with them regardless, right? We claim that you can coexist because you can coexist both the religious demographics and the green demographics. I think this is not true. This is just blatantly false. I think all these try to provide an example that religions can coexist within a country. But we're talking about political context and movements. I think never have you ever seen two different religions co-op within one political movement, right? I think neither can the green and the conservative religious demographic. So I think that their claim is just factually untrue. Secondly, right, they also will bring up the idea that karma is more personal. Therefore, it's a better tactic to encourage, I guess, people to join into the movement. I think few responses to this. Firstly, my first speaker already established karma as somewhat of a fear tactic that tells you that if you have done bad, you will get bad. I think this is already something that affects their definition of how this is on the personal level, right? In fact, I think this is something that drives a lot of people away because while you do good, you might get good in return concept might be appealing, most people fear the tangible harms that may happen to them, thus choose not to believe in karma. I think this already shows how it's essentially not personal. And I think another thing that they have ignored, right, is my speaker's counterfactual, right? We are the one that want to appeal on a more personal level, in a collective manner. I think what is truly a personal way to campaign, right, is you try to appeal to all demographics, and they do so this by presenting cold hard facts, right, about how we're all in this together. The environment when it deteriorates affect all of us. I think this is what is personal, right? You are part of it. You are in a very real situation to feel the harms of climate change. And I think this is the type of personal campaigning that our side actually wants. I think this is something that opening government simply did not respond to. So I believe that, right, and their point about how you can coexist religion and the green movement, and as well how karma is not personal, already fall. But let's look at other things they push. Right? They also push the idea that, perhaps attracting religious aligned demographics to the Green Party can follow its popularity because the Green Party isn't very popular. I think there's a few problems with this, right? First, right, I think my previous speaker already mentioned that religious aligned demographics, right, are more conservative. And in fact, OG themselves agree. And we believe that this, right, even if they can boost the popularity of the Green movement, leads to two tangible harm. I think this will greatly affect the effectiveness of the Green Party. Why? Because or any Green movement at all. Because ultra-religious people often have the perception that God is in control. And I think this is a rhetoric that often push that leads to inaction. Secondly, right, and as we all know with very religious voters, right, they tend to want to take their policy platform to want to campaign on other issues. We believe that more religiously aligned movement prefer to campaign on bigger issues that they might try to turn this green movement into. And this brings me nicely onto my positive material push, right? And the first idea about how if you include karma in your campaign, you defeat the purpose and purpose of a movement. I'll take the pure one later at 5. So one of my main push on how the idea, right, is that this idea is grounded in the fact that first need to look at the green movement's characteristic, right? I think most green movement are technically single issue political movements, right? All they care about is the environment, and most of the time, right, even Green Party in political movements only really care about the environment. And secondly, right, I think the environmental movement's appeal lies in how it campaigns on an issue that affects everyone. So this is two exclusive facts that the green movement need to consider. And I believe that because of these two inherent characteristics of a green movement, right, as an actor, I think they are very unlikely to want to co-opt right-wing movements. And I believe that, right, that what the goal of a green movement that they want to strive to, that will benefit the green movement, right, is that they wish to be consistent in focusing on future solution to fight climate change. I think when we bring in karma into its message, right, this essentially will start to play a blame game. Because karma probably suggests that it's because humankind has done that in the past that today the state of the climate is in such a predicament that needs people to act. I think when you use blame to try to spur action, this defeats the purpose of the green movement already. Because first things first, now the green movement becomes divisive, and secondly, I think this already defeats the purpose of trying to achieve broad support. I believe the environmental movement will lose their purpose, when they shift to this blame tactic. Because, I think you lose broad support when you split religious demographics and within the party as well. The original left-leaning people within a green movement and newly joined religious demographic. I think, the schism between these will essentially already cause green movements to lose its effectiveness. Before I hit 6, I'll take the POI.
Yeah, so your characterization of lumping conservatives and anti-environmental movement demographics is often extremely simplistic. There can be Buddhist, the Buddhist religion cares a lot about caring about the environmental movement. Like Islam, Muslims believe that they are the caretakers of the environment. Yeah,
I think the belief in what you see of caring for the environment compared to the actions that the Green Party take is very different, I think the biggest problem about conservative demographics in religion is their inaction. I think because when you bring in religious conservatives into any movement, a lot of the actions they take for the environment is grounded in their own religious belief. Some believe the earth is sacred and these kind of things, and a lot of this will lead to inaction in what they do. Sometimes perhaps the whole concept of a plant-based meat that's constructed in labs, will this fall in line with what, for example, Muslims consider halal and all, All these are chances for inaction. We believe that the worst part is conflicting progressives with conservative, and this will defeat the purpose of the green movement as a whole. We believe that as an active motion, this debate is ultimately about what benefits the movement as a whole. We believe that such a move is incredibly antagonistic. How to oppose?
I thank the DLO for that very fine speech, starting with the closing half of this debate, calling a number of God.